Donc maintenant, Minna Långström va... Oh, we pronounce your name like that? Okay, it's time to ask. Va présenter son film The Other Side of Mars. Donc, Minna est finlandaise, c'est une artiste des médias et cinéaste. Et son travail se compose d'installations cinématographiques participatives, de courts-métrages et de documentaires. Donc pour son film The Other Side of Mars, qui explore le rôle des images dans les missions martiennes, elle a été en contact avec des géologues, des astrobiologistes et des ingénieurs de la NASA impliqués dans les missions actuelles sur Mars. Et ses précédents films et œuvres ont été sélectionnés dans différents festivals et exposés dans différents musées. Donc, a priori, la façon dont on va fonctionner maintenant, c'est en deux étages, 3 étages même. Le premier étage, elle va faire un exposé sur la façon dont elle a abordé ce projet. Ensuite, on va avoir un premier temps de discussion entre Valérie Charletti et Minna au sujet de l'exploration martienne. Ensuite, nous aurons le film de Minna et ensuite, à nouveau, une discussion avec nous tous. Je crois qu'il faut que j'aille parler au câble.
So yeah, my name is Minna Långström and I come from Helsinki, Finland, and I'm not gonna do a long introduction on myself because I don't have time to finish the talk. So it's like I have made a film and I'm gonna talk about that, and I'm gonna let the film speak for itself because I think it's very difficult to, I'm gonna try to not talk so much about things that are in the film, but a little bit about background research, so that's why it says in the program, I'm gonna talk about that, because it's kind of no point in introducing a film you're just gonna see. So The Other Side of Mars is a documentary about scientific imaging and photography used in studying the planet Mars. I've, in my previous work, looked at various visual technologies and issues of subjectivity and representation in relation to these, in relation to these various visual technologies that we use. The idea to make this film I got when realizing the extent to which photography and photographs are used in the Mars missions today. In the science, they're used more than ever, also in science in general. Not very long ago, images were not that huge of a part of research, and even there were several spacecraft sent into space after cameras were invented, where they just didn't put cameras on them because it was too heavy and they thought it wasn't like a priority. Today, you cannot even imagine sending something without a camera. Throughout the project, I found that Martian photography can tell us very much about our paradoxical relationship to images and photography quite in general as well. So I wanted to look into the Martian photography, but then realized that it actually says something quite general about our relationship to images. I started working on the development of the film in 2014 and went for a research trip to Pasadena in California. It's part of the Los Angeles city, and to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory there, which is a NASA Caltech institution. So it was like spring 2015 when I went there, and we filmed there the film in 2017. My first interviews there helped me define the focus of the film. So I went there quite kind of in a broad, looking for various things that I didn't know. I was looking for topics and tried to be very open. So I went there to look for and define the focus of the film, and I then realized to what extent photographs are used to help, and the way they help us form a complete picture of Mars, or not a complete, but some picture of Mars. However, I noticed also that there were a lot of things that these photographs leave out. So I started thinking of also just in a quite practical sense that, you know, the rovers see only to a certain distance. So I started thinking more symbolically about negative spaces and parts left out of view. And as these Mars photographs are taken by engineers in NASA sitting at their desks, I, in my visual research, drew the immediate space around a desk to sketch out what of that space we actually see when we sit in front of the desk. And so we see things from our point of view, and in the film, I kind of mirrored it with what the rover sees on Mars, so, which we see through our monitors. And this is what what one camera sees, pointing at a certain direction from its point of view in the space it inhabits on Mars. So later, when coming across Sarah Ahmed's essay, Orientations Matter, it seemed like the absolute perfect match for the film, as Ahmed in it expands on Edmund Husserl's phenomenological text, Ideas 1, with the writing desk acting as the symbol of our point of view. So this is what you will see in these holonovel interventions in the film. Another key to the film is the holodeck as a symbol in my film. It's a symbol of the perfect utopian image, the fictional Star Trek VR environment, entertainment environment in the films and TV series especially. It's called the holodeck, and it's a kind of a hyper 3D image where everything can be seen from any perspective, like in a computer game, but the experience also involves all senses, and thus is perfectly immersive. And this is from the very first holodeck sequence in the Star Trek TV series. So this is a sequence I also kind of paraphrased in the beginning of my film, which you will soon see. The metaphor of the holodeck is at the same time there to reflect on perhaps the best fictional comparison to the culture of JPL, which is Star Trek, in its capacity as a theater of science and meritocracy. And this is kind of citing the science fiction columnist, writer, and economist Manuela, who is a French-American economist who wrote this book called Trekonomics, which is really great. So I interviewed him, and him among 11 other people when we filmed the film in 21 days in Los Angeles. And here is a test picture of my the main person in the film, Vandy Verma, when she's jumping over the rocks in the same ways as he did. So. So Star Trek's Starfleet Utopia, rare in the world of sci-fi, like utopia is not as common as dystopia, is a post-scarcity envision based on the technologies that have made money and capitalism obsolete. Because of the replicator, there is no more need for money. And the highest goal is not profit, but scientific, cultural, and social merit. However, the alien societies in the galaxy still use some of the same technologies in perfectly different ways. So they might use the replicator to actually get profit. That is kind of referring to the Ferengi. However, yes, so it actually goes to show that it's not the technologies in themselves that are valuable, it is how you use them. Starfleet is also emancipated and culturally and ethnically quite diverse, and contains some of the strongest female protagonists in TV history. The structure of my film came about taking into account several viewpoints I encountered in both literature and the many interviews I made with scientists in one way or another involved in the Mars missions. I wanted to present as many perspectives as possible onto my main theme of photography and imaging in more or less subliminal ways. The film was shot in Pasadena in these locations. So the biggest, like the big circle, just above Glendale, is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and then the smaller circle is Caltech, which is a California Institute of Technology, where that is actually JPL is administered by Caltech. And then we filmed also at these two observatories, Mount Wilson Observatory and Stony Ridge. And Mount Wilson is a big kind of, nowadays part of it is museum, but it's still used for science. And the Stony Ridge is an amateur observatory. I'll tell you about it a little bit later. So there's a lot of fascinating history when it comes to JPL that I also unfortunately can't go into, but it's really starting quite it started quite in an interesting way in the 30s, sorry. And actually NASA is only from it's established in the 50s. So JPL is older than NASA, and also the first Mars programs. It's quite interesting. This Manu Sadia was talking about this, which is not in the film, but the first Mars programs, before both of these, they were like in the U.S. So there's an association between them and the project in Alamo, the Manhattan Project. So he talked about in my interview with him these quite interesting ideas about how the first Mars projects kind of came out of the discussion of what are we going to do now when we know, it's the first time the human beings have known that there we have the possibility to destroy ourselves, because with the atomic bomb came this kind of this realization that we could actually destroy our planet ourselves. Now we also have other means to do that, but kind of a logical next step was to think, what could we do about that? We could go to Mars, so we can, maybe it kind of was born out of those discussions, but with some of the same people. So there are so many points of view into this film, and I got so many different kinds of. It's always with documentaries, it's the same thing. You get a lot of material, and then you can only fit so much. So I actually there's a lot of things that are not talked about in the film, but I think I definitely used everything I researched before. So some of the first things I needed to establish for myself was to position myself and us in the history of Mars exploration as women, or I am a woman, so I felt a need to look at the history and investigate the history of women in astronomy and space exploration. I came to the conclusion that quantitatively, the exclusion of women can be seen as total during much of the previous century. The representation being so small that it hardly shows up in statistics until very recently. We have seen the numbers of women in these fields starting slowly to grow in the 1980s and escalating rapidly in the last 20 to 30 years. It's quite a revolution. It's quite incredible that we're standing here. Like 50 years ago, this room would have been filled with men and not one single woman here. Nevertheless, the women in research positions, as well as outside of them, during the last century, managed to make important contributions to astronomy, and investigations done in retrospects have shown that despite not giving credit for it, their input was often invaluable, despite coming from positions in the margins or periphery of the research institutions. And a great read during my background research very early on in the project was a book in Finnish. It's called The Woman and Cosmos by Eva Isaksson, who is a Finnish science writer and theoretical physicist. I also interviewed her, and you can see her name in the credits. Her book includes essays on women scientists throughout history, as she writes, researchers of exactness and the natural sciences, including astronomy. Mentioned in the last chapter of the book, Eva Isaksson did a study in 1982 called Luna, mapping out the problems and obstacles women faced in STEM careers, and this was applied to non-binary people and minorities as well. As women only started largely getting access to observatories in the 1980s, these kinds of studies featuring exact facts and numbers were probably quite useful in creating change. So in the development, this is a picture of a film that I made. It's actually the blimp. This is called a blimp. It's kind of a cover of a film camera. It was used, it's Ingmar Bergman's old camera, or old blimp that we used for doing a film that is a critique of Bergman's persona. So in the development of other works, I previously looked into the equally total exclusion of female perspectives in film during the major part of the 20th century and how that still affects us. It is less painful to lift up so-called forgotten individuals from the shadows of the history instead of dwelling on past inequalities like I am doing now. But I think we also respect those who did not get a fair chance by looking at the realities of those times, because they are also not behind us yet. There are pockets of inequality everywhere still, as well as the possibility of backlashes. I happen to have the statistics of the numbers of women as film directors throughout film history in Sweden, as the data is available on the Swedish film database. So I present that, although I think it was the same almost in every country in Europe, or worse. During the golden age, when more films were made than ever, 1930 to 1959, 3 decades, 30 years, 1,050 feature films were made in Sweden alone. That's a lot for a feature film. 4 of these 1,050 feature films in Sweden were directed by a woman. And actually one was co-directed, so that makes 3.5. During the same period, 3 script writers were women. This is not because women did not want to make films or direct or write. Quite like observatories, film studios were places of total and active exclusion for half a century. And of course, before that as well. When reading about the restrictions women historically have been facing in astronomy, I sometimes bumped into the name of one of the observatories we were going to film at, the beautiful Mount Wilson Observatory, where so many important discoveries have been made. I also encountered stories about renowned female astronomers who were either not allowed to research there, and the same is true for other observatories, because of facility restrictions. There were no women's bathrooms, for example, or prevented from doing observation during the night because this was not considered suitable for women. And if they were allowed to work, there it was often done unofficially with a relative or spouse working at the same time in the observatory, giving access to them. When the spaces slowly started opening up for women because of changes in the law, it didn't happen on an equal basis instantaneously, as women were given living quarters without basic facilities, and they were not allowed into all spaces, for example, the canteen or social area where scientists would gather and exchange ideas and experiences. As Vera Rubin notes in her 1981 letter to Margaret Burbidge, not until 1979 was a woman named a Mount Wilson Carnegie Fellow, and up until 1970, where there were no National Science Foundation grants to work at these telescopes at all given to women. So now, astronomy and interplanetary research, again here one can draw a parallel to filmmaking, demands access to technical equipment. So not gaining access, actually there's supposed to be another, yes, yeah. So not gaining access is an effective way of complete exclusion, not to mention all of the other ways of creating a hostile environment for women and other historically and currently discriminated groups. So here we jump over to the mountain next to Mount Wilson. It's another mountain. Mount Wilson was actually protected from fire because of the observatory, but not the mountain with the other observatory, the smaller one. So here you see the marks of the forest fires. And in this picture you see Sarah Martin, a solar astronomer who was kind enough to give us access to Stony Ridge. The observatory, which has a very high quality telescope, was established in 1947 by a group of committed amateur astronomers. And quite a few of the observatory, and this is also filming locations, that's why I'm showing it. So it was quite interesting to hear the history of this also, because it was established in 1947, and incredibly enough, Sarah Martin, a solar astronomer, was able to get membership of this observatory in the 1960s already, so she was the first woman on there. Female member, and it took a long time for her to get this. When the film you're just about to see was shown in the Czech Republic at Jihlava, a film festival, after the film had been shown, a solar astronomer came up to me after the film and said that she had seen Sarah's name in my credits, because I was thanking her for giving us access to the observatory. Then he asked if how I know her, and then I told the story to him, and then I asked him, does he know her? Then he said, no, I don't know her. She's just in the textbooks, of solar astronomers. So he had studied solar astronomy, and she's actually made some quite important discoveries, and is mentioned in those books. So it was quite nice for me to hear this, as I was right then working on a short documentary about Sarah that was filmed during the one day of making the film that you're going to see. So it was also shown in the BioArt Society's galleries in Helsinki last fall. The film is about Sarah Martin's work in solar astronomy and her usage of film as research material, because it turned out that she and her colleagues had made this quite interesting liaison with the Hollywood film studios in the 50s, where they would, instead of like, that was the common way to do it, was to have your own lab in the observatory where you would develop this film, but they realized, hey, we're in Hollywood, so why not go to the film studios? And so I found that quite interesting, the way she uses film in her work, and made a very short documentary about that. Well, the film you're going to see very soon, does of course exclude some perspectives. I interviewed 11 people somehow working with the Mars missions in one way or another. Quite few of them were actually in NASA and various kinds of scientists, and only 5 people actually ended up in the film. But and editing is actually that is the process, and it's with a film like this, it's like trying to cram a whole bookshelf into the form of a haiku. And so one of the things I really would have liked to go into, which I had to cut, was one of the darlings was the whole question about how autonomous is this rover, to what extent does the rover itself take the pictures. And we had a long discussion with the main person of the film about that, but that unfortunately fell out. And just to round it off, I think that many aspects of the background research, despite not being mentioned verbally in film, still might make it there, and the background research creates an overall approach to your subject, which, if edited well, can still be transmitted, hopefully. Thank you very much.